How Nas Daily changed his own career. You're nothing but a fraud, Mr. Yassin. Security, remove this man from the stage before he embarrasses himself further. Mr. Sterling, in 30 seconds, everyone in this room will know the truth about who the real fraud is. The grand ballroom of the Manhattan Plaza Hotel fell silent. Nusser Yassin, known to millions as Nas Daily, stood at the microphone on stage facing Richard Sterling, the silver-haired CEO of Sterling Media Group. Behind Sterling sat the board of directors of the American Digital Media Association, 12 of the most powerful people in online content creation. In the audience, 300 industry professionals watched with phones raised, recording every second. Nas Daily's hand trembled slightly as he gripped the microphone. His simple black t-shirt stood in stark contrast to Sterling's tailored three-piece suit. Sweat beaded on Nas' forehead under the stage lights, but his dark eyes remained steady. He had 30 seconds to prove he belonged here, 30 seconds to expose the truth, 30 seconds before security reached him. The two uniformed guards were already moving down the side aisle, their hands reaching for their radios. "You have 15 seconds, Sterling said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Then you're gone." But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when Nusser Yassin had walked into that same hotel lobby, completely unaware that his entire career was about to explode. 3 hours earlier, the October morning had been crisp and clear. Nas walked through the rotating doors of the Manhattan Plaza Hotel carrying nothing but his phone and his Palestinian passport. He wore his signature-style black t-shirt, simple jeans, comfortable sneakers. At 33 years old, he had built an empire on authenticity, on being himself, on telling one-minute stories that connected with millions of people across the world. "Good morning, sir. Can I help you?" The concierge, a young woman with kind eyes, smiled at him from behind the marble desk. "Yes, I'm here for the Digital Media Summit. Nusser Yassin, but you might know me as Nas Daily." The woman's eyes lit up. "Oh my goodness, my grandmother loves your videos. She's 68 and watches every single one. You made her cry with that story about the blind painter last month." Nas smiled warmly. This was why he did what he did, not for the young tech crowd, but for people like this woman's grandmother, for the folks who had lived full lives and could appreciate genuine human stories. "That's wonderful. Please tell her I said hello. Is the registration desk through there?" "Yes, sir, straight through the gold doors. And Mr. Yassin, thank you. Your videos remind her that the world is still full of good people." Nas nodded, touched by the sentiment. He had no idea how much he would need to remember those words in the hours to come. The registration area bustled with activity. Content creators, media executives, and digital marketing professionals mingled near tables laden with name badges and conference materials. Nas spotted several faces he recognized from YouTube and Instagram, but most of the attendees were older corporate types, people who had transitioned from traditional media to digital platforms, bringing their old-world attitudes with them. "Nas Daily, man, I can't believe you're here." A young creator named Marcus approached, his enthusiasm infectious. "Your TED Talk changed my life. I quit my banking job and started making documentary shorts because of you." They talked for a few minutes, discussing the evolution of short-form content and the challenges of maintaining authenticity as platforms changed. But Nas noticed something odd. Several of the older executives nearby kept glancing at him, whispering to each other, their expressions ranging from curious to dismissive. "Excuse me." A woman's voice interrupted them. She was in her mid-50s with sharp features and intelligent gray eyes. She wore a press badge that identified her as Alina Martinez, senior journalist for Digital Media Today. "Mr. Yassin, could I have a word?" Marcus excused himself, and Alina guided Nas to a quieter corner near a towering arrangement of white orchids. "Ms. Martinez, nice to meet you." Nas extended his hand. "Likewise, I've been following your work for years. You've done something remarkable. You've made digital content accessible to older generations. My own mother is 72 and she watches your videos religiously. That means a lot. I never set out to target any specific age group. I just wanted to tell human stories." Alina's expression grew serious. "Mr. Yassin, I need to warn you about something. Richard Sterling is here today." Nas recognized the name immediately. Richard Sterling was a legend in media, or perhaps a relic, depending on who you asked. At 68 years old, Sterling had built his fortune in television during the 1980s and 90s. He owned Sterling Media Group, which had recently acquired several digital media companies, including the platform that hosted much of Nas' early work. "I know who he is," Nas said carefully. "Why would I need a warning?" "Because he's planning something. I've been investigating Sterling Media for 6 months. They're systematically acquiring independent content creators' rights and back catalogs, then burying the original creators while repackaging their content with corporate hosts. Nas felt a chill run down his spine. That's not illegal, is it? Not illegal, just deeply unethical. But here's what you need to know. Sterling has been buying up the rights to your early videos, the ones you made before you fully understood platform agreements and content ownership. That's impossible. I own my content. Do you? Did you read every agreement you signed in 2016 and 2017 when you were just starting out? When platforms were desperate for creators and buried transfer clauses in 50-page contracts? Nas' mind raced back to those early days. He had been 25, fresh out of Harvard, working at Venmo, making 1-minute videos as a side project. He had signed so many agreements just to get his videos distributed. His hands had been shaking when he quit his 6-figure job to pursue video creation full-time. Had he missed something crucial in those contracts? Even if he has some rights, he can't just erase me from my own work, Nas said, but his voice lacked conviction. He's not erasing you. He's planning something worse. At today's summit, he's unveiling a new platform called Sterling Stories. From what I've learned, it's going to feature remastered classics, which means your early work, re-edited and re-narrated by Sterling's corporate hosts, with you receiving minimal credit and no creative control. The registration area suddenly felt suffocating. Nas had built his entire brand on being authentic, on showing his face, on telling stories in his own voice. The idea of some corporate narrator taking his work and repackaging it felt like theft of his very identity. Are you telling me this? Nas asked. Because I believe in what you do, and because Sterling represents everything wrong with how corporate media treats independent creators. He's going to make his announcement in the main ballroom at noon. There's a luncheon for board members and select press. You're not invited. Then how do I stop this? Alina looked at him with a mixture of sympathy and determination. I don't know if you can, but if anyone can expose what Sterling is really doing, it's you. You've spent years telling other people's stories. Maybe it's time to tell your own. She slipped a piece of paper into his hand. This is a USB drive with evidence, contracts, emails, financial records, everything I've gathered. If you can get on that stage at noon and tell the truth, I can run the story. But Nas, Sterling has security everywhere. He has lawyers. He has the entire board of the Digital Media Association backing him. You'll be fighting the entire old guard of media. Nas looked down at the USB drive hidden in his palm. His phone buzzed with notifications, thousands of them, as it did every day. Messages from viewers around the world. Many of them were older people, folks in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who had found his videos refreshing because he treated every subject with respect and curiosity. He thought about his own parents, Palestinians who had immigrated to Israel, who had worked so hard to give him opportunities. His father, now 65, had taught him that integrity mattered more than money. His mother, 63, had shown him that stories connected people across all divides. I'll do it, Nas said quietly, but I need to understand exactly what I'm up against. For the next 90 minutes, Alina and Nas sat in the hotel's business center, poring over the documents on the USB drive. The picture that emerged made Nas' stomach turn. Sterling Media had identified 23 independent creators whose early work had inadvertently granted platform rights that could be exploited. Nas Daily was the crown jewel. His videos had been viewed over 3 billion times. But there were others too. A grandmother who made cooking videos teaching traditional recipes. A veteran who shared stories of other veterans. A retired teacher who explained complex topics simply. All of them were in their 50s, 60s, or 70s. All of them had built audiences by being genuine, and Sterling planned to erase every one of them, replacing their authentic voices with polished corporate presenters while keeping the profits from their work. Look at this email, Alina pointed to her laptop screen. Sterling wrote this to his board 3 months ago. Nas read the words that made his blood boil. The older demographic is the fastest-growing segment in digital media, but they don't want the authentic chaos of actual older creators. They want the comfort of familiar corporate presentation. We can take the content these amateurs created and repackage it properly, polished, professional, profitable. He called them amateurs, Nas said, his voice tight with anger. These are people who lived through the civil rights movement, Vietnam, Watergate. They've lived more life than Sterling could imagine, and he thinks they're amateurs. He doesn't see them as people, Alina said. He sees them as content mines to be stripped and exploited. Nas thought of his viewer Doris, an 81-year-old woman from Kansas who commented on every video. She had survived the loss of her husband in Vietnam, raised 3 children alone, and now spent her retirement finding joy in stories from around the world. She had emailed him once. "You remind me that despite everything I've seen, humanity is still beautiful." People like Doris deserved better than Richard Sterling's contempt. "The luncheon starts in 20 minutes, Alina said, checking her watch. It was an elegant timepiece, the kind Nuz recognized as a gift from another era. "Sterling will make his announcement right after the welcome remarks. Once he goes public, it's done. The board will back him. The press, except for me, will spin it as innovation." "How do I get in there?" "You don't. The ballroom is invite-only. Sterling has a list. Security has been briefed to keep out anyone who isn't on that list, especially you." Nuz stood and paced the small business center. Through the window, he could see Central Park in the distance, trees displaying their October colors. He thought about all the times he had faced impossible situations while making his videos. The time he had convinced a reclusive artist to tell his story. The time he had bridged conversations between enemies. The time he had simply shown up when everyone said he couldn't. "I'm going in anyway," Nuz said. "Nuz, they'll throw you out. Sterling will have you arrested for trespassing." "Maybe, but I have to try. Those creators, those viewers, they deserve someone to fight for them." Alina studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, give me the USB drive back. If this goes wrong, I need to protect the evidence. But Nuz, be careful. Sterling didn't get where he is by playing fair." Nuz walked through the hotel corridors toward the grand ballroom. Heart pounded, but his mind was clear. He had spent 8 years telling other people's stories of courage. Now it was time to show some of his own. The ballroom doors were flanked by 2 security guards. Beyond them, Nuz could hear the murmur of conversation and the clink of silverware on china. The luncheon had already begun. "Badge, please," the larger guard said, his hand outstretched. "I'm Nas Daily. I'm a content creator. I should be on the list." The guard checked his tablet, scrolling through names. His expression hardened. "You're not on the list, sir. Please step away from the doors. This is a digital media summit. I'm one of the largest independent digital creators in the world. There must be a mistake." "No mistake. Mr. Sterling was very specific about who should and shouldn't be admitted." So Sterling had already blocked him. Of course he had. Nuz took a deep breath. He thought about his father's words. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. "I need to get in there. What Sterling is about to announce will hurt a lot of people." "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the area. Just give me 5 minutes. Let me speak." "Security, we need backup at ballroom entrance A," the guard spoke into his radio. Nuz's window was closing. In moments more, security would arrive. He would be escorted out, possibly banned from the hotel. Sterling would make his announcement unchallenged. 23 creators would be exploited. Millions of viewers would never know the truth. He couldn't let that happen. Nuz didn't think, he just moved. As a waiter emerged from a service door carrying a tray of empty plates, Nuz slipped past him and through the doorway. He found himself in the service corridor behind the ballroom. Staff bustled past, carrying trays of food and drinks. None of them questioned his presence. He followed the corridor until he found another door marked Stage Access. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding his system. This was crazy. This was reckless. This was necessary. The door opened onto the side of the stage, hidden from view by a heavy curtain. Nuz could hear a voice speaking at the podium, someone giving welcoming remarks. He peeked through the curtain. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. 300 people sat at round tables draped in white linen. At the head table on the stage sat Richard Sterling and the board of directors of the Digital Media Association. Sterling looked exactly as Nuz had imagined. Silver hair perfectly combed. Expensive suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. The confidence of someone who had never been told no, who had spent decades controlling narratives and crushing competition. The welcoming speaker finished. Sterling rose, buttoning his jacket, approaching the podium. Applause filled the room. This was it, now or never. Nuz stepped through the curtain onto the stage. The applause faltered, then died completely. 300 faces turned toward him. Sterling, halfway to the podium, stopped and stared. "Who the hell are you?" Sterling demanded, his polished demeanor cracking. "My name is Nusair Yassin. You might know me as Nas Daily, and we need to talk about what you're planning to announce today." The room erupted. Security guards appeared at the edges of the ballroom, speaking urgently into their radios. Board members stood, confused and angry. Someone shouted for security to remove him. But Nuz walked to the microphone. His hands no longer trembled. He thought of Doris from Kansas. He thought of Alina's mother. He thought of every older viewer who had found connection and joy in his videos. Sterling reached the microphone first, his face red with fury. "You're nothing but a fraud, Mr. Yassin. Security, remove this man from the stage before he embarrasses himself further." Nuz looked at Sterling, then at the 300 people watching, then at the phones recording everything. In this moment, he understood that his entire career had led to this. Every story he had told, every connection he had made, every lesson he had learned about human dignity and truth, it all came down to this moment. Mr. Sterling, in 30 seconds, everyone in this room will know the truth about who the real fraud is. And that's where our story began. Sterling shouted, his composure completely gone. I'm announcing a legitimate business venture that will bring professional quality to amateur content. Amateur? Nuz turned to face Sterling directly. You call them amateurs. Frank Coleman, who shares stories of his Vietnam platoon, he's 71 years old and has lived through more than you ever will. Margaret Chen, who teaches traditional Chinese cooking, she's 68 and spent 50 years perfecting her craft. Robert Washington, who documents African-American history, he's 65 and marched with John Lewis. These people are not amateurs, Mr. Sterling. They're the real deal. And you want to erase them because you think older viewers want polish instead of authenticity. A murmur rippled through the audience. Several older attendees nodded. One woman in her 60s stood up. I know Frank Coleman's videos, she called out. My father was in Vietnam. Frank's stories helped me understand what my father went through. If you replace his voice with some actor, you destroy the whole point. Another person stood, then another. Within seconds, a dozen people were on their feet, many of them older viewers who had attended the summit specifically because digital media was finally creating content for them. Sterling's face had gone from red to pale. He gestured frantically to security, but the guards had stopped moving. They were looking at their supervisor, who was listening to someone on his radio, probably the hotel manager, who was probably watching the phones, recording everything, thinking about lawsuits and public relations disasters. Nuz continued, his voice strong. I have evidence, emails, contracts, financial projections. Mr. Sterling wrote to his board that older demographics don't want authentic older creators. They want the comfort of corporate presentation. But you know what? That's not what viewers want at all. My audience isn't just young people. Half my viewers are over 50, a quarter are over 60, and they don't watch my videos because they're polished or professional. They watch because they're real. He held up his phone, showing the screen to the audience. This is a comment from Doris, who's 81. She wrote, Dear Nuz, thank you for reminding me that humanity is still beautiful. This is from Robert, age 77. Your videos help me understand my grandchildren's world while teaching them about mine. This is from Helen, age 69. I was born during the civil rights era and lived through everything since. Your honest storytelling gives me hope. Nuz's voice caught with emotion. These people don't want corporate content, Mr. Sterling. They want truth. They want connection. They want to see themselves and their experiences reflected with dignity and respect. And you want to take that away from them for profit. The room was completely silent now. Sterling stood frozen, perhaps realizing for the first time that he had miscalculated badly. In trying to silence Nuz, he had given him the biggest platform possible. Elena Martinez was on her feet, her phone recording everything. Other journalists were typing frantically on their laptops. Board members were looking at each other uncertainly. The president of the Digital Media Association, a 72-year-old former newspaper executive named Jonathan Barnes, stood and approached the microphone. Mr. Yassin, these are serious accusations, Barnes said, but his tone wasn't hostile. It was measured, thoughtful. Do you have actual proof of this scheme? I do, sir. A journalist named Elena Martinez has been investigating Sterling Media for 6 months. She has contracts, emails, and financial documents showing exactly what I've described. She's right there. Nuz pointed to Elena, who raised her press badge. Barnes looked at Sterling. Richard, is this true? Sterling's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His carefully constructed image had crumbled. He looked for the first time like what he really was, an old man who had confused control with respect, who had thought he could buy authenticity, who had forgotten that the viewers he dismissed as a demographic were actually human beings with dignity and discernment. The platform was going to be a gift to creators, Sterling finally managed. Professional production values, wider distribution, proper monetization. Without their voices, Nuz said quietly. Without their faces. Without the very thing that made their work meaningful. An older man stood up in the audience. He was clearly in his 70s, with distinguished gray hair and the bearing of someone used to authority. My name is Frank Coleman. I'm one of the creators Mr. Sterling acquired rights to. I was told my videos would be archived and distributed through Sterling's network. Nobody said anything about removing my narration or replacing me. A woman in her late 60s stood next. Margaret Chen. Same story. I signed papers I barely understood because I was told it would help more people discover traditional Chinese cooking. If I had known Mr. Sterling planned to erase me from my own work, I would never have signed anything. More creators stood. 7 in total. All of them older, all of them with faces that showed lives fully lived, experiences earned, wisdom gained. All of them betrayed by a man who saw them only as content to be exploited. Jonathan Barnes turned to Sterling, his expression hardening. "Richard, we need to talk, privately. Security, please escort Mr. Sterling and the board to the conference room." "Jonathan, this is a business decision," Sterling started, but Barnes cut him off. "This is an ethical disaster, Richard, and it's happening on my watch at my summit in front of the entire digital media industry. We're going to talk. Now." As security, no longer threatening Nas, but instead surrounding Sterling, began to escort people off stage, Barnes turned to Nas. "Mr. Yassin, I need to apologize. We should have been more diligent about who we allowed to present at this summit. Would you be willing to stay and speak with us about what independent creators actually need from platforms and partnerships?" Nuz looked at the audience. Many of them were on their feet now, applauding. Not the polite applause of a business luncheon, but genuine appreciation. Several older viewers had tears in their eyes. "Yes, sir, I'll stay." The next hour was a blur. Barnes convened an emergency meeting with the board, excluding Sterling. Alina's story went live on digital media today, complete with embedded video from dozens of phones that had recorded Nuz's speech. Within minutes, it was trending across every social media platform. But the real transformation happened in the conversations that followed. Frank Coleman approached Nuz, shaking his hand firmly. "Son, I flew helicopters in Vietnam. I've been in situations where I thought I might not make it out. What you did up there, that took real courage. Thank you. Thank you for your service, Frank, and thank you for telling your stories. My grandfather fought in the 1967 war. I wish he had lived long enough to share his stories the way you share yours. Then we do it for them, for the ones who didn't come home and for the ones who came home but never got to tell their truth." Margaret Chen joined them, her eyes bright with emotion. "My mother taught me to cook in Taiwan in the 1950s. Every recipe carries a memory. If some stranger had narrated my videos, those memories would have been lost. You saved more than content today, young man. You saved legacies." One by one, the creators Sterling had tried to exploit came to thank Nuz. Each of them carried stories that spanned decades. Each of them represented generations of experience. Each of them had been dismissed by Sterling as amateurs, but they were actually the keepers of cultural memory, the bridges between past and present. Robert Washington, the historian who documented African-American experiences, put his hand on Nuz's shoulder. "I marched in Selma in 1965. I've been fighting to make sure our stories are told correctly with our voices for 60 years. What Sterling tried to do, erasing our voices while profiting from our work, that's just another form of erasure. But you stood up. You spoke truth. That's how change happens." The board meeting stretched into the afternoon. Alina kept Nuz updated via text messages. Sterling was being removed as CEO of Sterling Media Group. The contracts with independent creators were being reviewed and revised. The Digital Media Association was drafting new ethical guidelines for platform acquisition of creator content. By evening, as the October sun set over Manhattan, Nuz found himself back in the hotel lobby. The grand ballroom was empty now, the luncheon long over. But the business center was packed with creators, journalists, and board members, all working together to figure out how to protect independent voices in an industry that too often valued profit over people. Alina approached him, exhaustion and triumph mixing on her face. "You did it. Sterling's done. His board forced him to resign. Every contract he made with independent creators is being voided with full rights returned." "What happens to Sterling now?" "He's 78 years old. He'll retire, probably bitter and confused about why people didn't appreciate his vision. He built his empire in an era when a few men in suits controlled all media. He never adapted to a world where authenticity matters more than production value." Nuz looked out the window at the darkening city. "I feel sorry for him, actually. He could have been part of something beautiful. All these creators with incredible stories, all these viewers hungry for real connection, he could have facilitated that. Instead, he tried to control it." "That's the difference between you and him," Alina said. "You see people, he saw assets." Jonathan Barnes appeared, looking 20 years older than he had that morning. "Mr. Yassin, could we talk?" They sat in a quiet corner of the lobby. Barnes ordered coffee neither of them would drink. "I owe you an apology," Barnes said. I'm 72 years old. I started in newspapers in 1975. I've watched media change from print to broadcast to digital. I thought I understood this new world, but today showed me I don't. Mr. Barnes, please let me finish. Richard Sterling and I came up together. We both built our careers in traditional media. We had power, influence, control over narratives. When digital media exploded, we both tried to maintain that control. Sterling did it through acquisition and exploitation. I did it by not listening, by not seeing that the rules had changed. Barnes looked down at his hands. Those creators who stood up today, Frank, Margaret, Robert, they're my age, my generation. And Sterling treated them like they were disposable, like their voices didn't matter. That makes me ashamed. You stopped it, Nas said gently. When you saw what was happening, you stopped it. Barely. If you hadn't shown up, if you hadn't had the courage to interrupt that luncheon, Sterling would have made his announcement. By tonight, his platform would have been launched. Those creators would have been erased. Barnes looked at Nas directly. I need to ask you something. Will you help us? The Digital Media Association needs to understand how to support independent creators, especially older creators. We need to learn from people like you who actually value authentic voices over corporate polish. I'm not an expert, Mr. Barnes. I just make videos. No, you connect people. You tell stories that matter. And you had the courage today to risk everything for people you've never met. That's leadership. Over the next several hours, Nuz found himself in conversation after conversation. With creators, with journalists, with executives who genuinely wanted to understand how to do better. The hotel restaurant filled with people sharing stories over dinner, stories of lives lived, lessons learned, connections made. Frank Coleman told stories of Vietnam that had Nuz both laughing and crying. Margaret Chen described growing up in post-war Taiwan, the food scarcity that made her value every ingredient. Robert Washington recounted marching for civil rights, meeting Rosa Parks, seeing history unfold. You know what I love about your generation? Nuz asked them. You've seen the world transform. You lived through the space race, the civil rights movement, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the birth of the internet. You have context for everything. When you tell stories, they carry weight because you've lived them. And you know what I love about your generation, Frank replied. You listen, most young people look at us and see old folks who don't understand their world, but you see us as people with stories worth hearing. Because you are, Nuz said simply. Everyone has a story, age just makes them richer, Margaret smiled. My mother used to say something in Mandarin that translates roughly to, an old broom knows the corners better. The longer you live, the more you understand the hidden places, the complicated truths. Sterling wanted to sweep away the old brooms and replace them with new ones, but new brooms don't know where the dust hides. Nuz pulled out his phone. Can I film this conversation? I want my viewers to hear you say that. They agreed, and Nuz recorded 15 minutes of conversation with Frank, Margaret, and Robert. It wouldn't be one of his famous one-minute videos. This needed time to breathe, space to honor the wisdom being shared. As the evening wore on, more people joined their table. Young creators seeking advice, middle-aged executives asking questions, other older creators sharing their own stories. The conversation flowed from serious to humorous to profound, the way real conversations do. Around 10 p.m., Alina appeared again. Nuz, you need to see this. She showed him her laptop. The story of what had happened at the summit was everywhere. But more than that, viewers were responding. The comments section of Alina's article was filled with people, many of them older, expressing relief, gratitude, and anger. One comment from a user named Doris1944 read, I'm 81 years old and I watch Nas Daily every day. If Mr. Sterling had succeeded in replacing these authentic voices with corporate narrators, I would have stopped watching. We older folks aren't stupid. We can tell the difference between real and fake. Thank you, Nuz, for fighting for us. Another from Vietnam Vet 1970. Frank Coleman's videos helped me process trauma I've carried for 55 years. His voice, his face, his tears when he talks about lost friends, that's what makes his stories healing. A corporate narrator reading a script wouldn't have the same impact. Thank you for protecting these stories. Hundreds more comments echoed the same themes. Authenticity mattered. Real voices mattered. Older viewers weren't a demographic to be exploited. They were people who deserved respect. But one comment caught Nuz's eye. It was from someone named Richard Sterling, 68. I was wrong. I spent 50 years in media thinking I knew what people wanted. Today I learned I don't know anything anymore. To the creators I tried to silence, I apologize. To Mr. Yassin, you were right and I was a fool. Nuz stared at the comment. Is this really him? Alina nodded. I verified it. He posted it an hour ago, first and only thing he's ever posted on social media. He's 78 years old, Nuz said quietly. He built his empire in a different world, when control and polish and corporate presentation were how media worked. I don't think he's evil, I think he just couldn't adapt. Are you really defending him after what he tried to do? No, what he planned was wrong, but people can change. He spent 3 hours reading comments from viewers explaining why his plan would have hurt them. Maybe for the first time in his life, he's actually listening to the audience instead of dictating to them. Frank, who had been listening, chuckled. You got a good heart, son, but don't forgive too easy. Change takes more than one apology comment. You're right, actions matter more than words, but I believe people can grow even at 78. The night deepened. Eventually, people began leaving, heading to their hotel rooms or homes. Nas found himself alone in the lobby around midnight, sitting in the same spot where he had first met Alina 12 hours earlier. His phone buzzed constantly with messages, but he ignored them for a moment. He needed to process what had happened. He had walked into this hotel as a content creator hoping to network at a summit. He was leaving as someone who had exposed corporate exploitation, protected vulnerable creators, and somehow become a voice for authentic digital media. It was overwhelming and humbling. Nas Daily, a hesitant voice interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to see a woman in her late 60s, elegantly dressed, with kind eyes magnified slightly by fashionable glasses. Yes, ma'am, can I help you? I hope so. My name is Caroline Barnes. Jonathan Barnes is my husband. Nas stood quickly. Mrs. Barnes, please sit down. She sat beside him, her movements careful, dignified. I wanted to thank you. Jonathan came to our room 2 hours ago and he cried. I haven't seen my husband cry in 43 years of marriage. He cried because he realized he had almost let something terrible happen. Mrs. Barnes, please let me finish. Jonathan is a good man. He built his career on honest journalism. But somewhere along the way, in the transition from newspapers to digital, he lost sight of why he became a journalist in the first place. It wasn't about industry power or board positions. It was about telling truth and serving readers. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I'm 69 years old. I taught high school English for 37 years. I retired 5 years ago. You know what I watch now? Creator content. People like you, like Frank Coleman, like Margaret Chen, because you tell stories that matter. Stories that remind me why I fell in love with literature in the first place, because stories connect us. She handed Nuz the paper. It was a handwritten letter. I wrote this tonight. It's a thank you letter to every creator who shares authentic stories. I'm going to mail physical letters to each of the 23 creators Sterling tried to silence, because people my age appreciate handwritten letters. We grew up writing them, and I want them to know that viewers like me value their work. Nuz felt tears prick his eyes. Mrs. Barnes, that's beautiful. You gave my husband back his purpose today. You reminded him why media matters, not for profit or power, but for connection and truth. So thank you from both of us. After she left, Nuz sat alone with her letter, reading her carefully written words praising authentic storytelling. He thought about all the connections that had been made today. Frank and Margaret and Robert, strangers this morning, friends tonight. Alina and her investigation that had made justice possible. Jonathan Barnes rediscovering his principles. Even Richard Sterling posting his apology, perhaps beginning a long journey toward understanding what he had missed. And at the center of it all, the viewers. The millions of people, many of them older, who had found connection and joy and meaning in authentic stories told by real people. That's what today had really been about. Not Nas Daily the brand or Sterling Media the corporation, but the fundamental human need to see ourselves reflected, to hear voices that sound like ours, to find connection in an increasingly disconnected world. Nuz pulled out his phone and opened his camera. He needed to make a video about today, but not yet, not tonight. Tonight, he needed to let everything settle to understand what this all meant. Tomorrow, he would tell this story. He would talk about corporate exploitation and independent creators. He would show Frank's face and Margaret's smile and Robert's dignity. He would let Alina share her journalism. He would even, perhaps, give Richard Sterling a chance to explain what he had learned. But tonight, he just sat in the quiet lobby and felt grateful. Grateful that he had found the courage to walk onto that stage. Grateful that people like Alina existed, willing to investigate and expose wrongdoing. Grateful for creators like Frank who had lived through history and were willing to share it. Grateful for viewers like Doris and Caroline who valued authenticity. Grateful for Jonathan Barnes, who had the humility to admit he was wrong. And yes, even grateful for Richard Sterling, who had accidentally created a moment that brought everyone together in defense of something important. The hotel night manager approached Nuz around 1 a.m. Sir, I'm sorry, but we need to close the public areas. Are you a guest here? No, I'm not. I should get going. Wait, you're Nas Daily, right? My grandmother watches your videos. She's 65 and she loves the one you made about the artist in Italy. Nuz smiled. Please tell her I said hello. Actually, could you do better than that? Could you make a quick video for her? Her name is Rosa. She's been going through chemotherapy and your videos are the only thing that makes her smile lately. Nuz didn't hesitate. Of course, what's her full name? 5 minutes later, Nuz had recorded a personal message for Rosa, telling her to stay strong, that the world needed her light, that her grandson clearly loved her very much. The night manager watched with tears in his eyes. Thank you, he whispered. You have no idea what this will mean to her. I think I do, Nuz said. That's why I make these videos, to connect people, to remind us all that we matter. Nuz left the Manhattan Plaza Hotel at 1:30 a.m., walking out into the cool October night. The streets of Manhattan were quieter now, but still alive with the energy that never quite faded in this city. He thought about walking, but decided to take a cab. As he stood on the corner waiting, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his father in Israel. Son, I saw the news. I'm proud of you. You did the right thing even when it was hard. That's all that matters. Nuz smiled, typing back a simple, thank you, Dad. Love you. Another message came in, this one from his mother. Nusair, I always knew you were special. Not because you're famous, but because you have a good heart. Sleep well tonight. You earned it. The cab arrived. As Nuz gave his address, his phone continued to buzz with messages from around the world. Viewers thanking him, creators reaching out to collaborate, journalists requesting interviews, platform executives suddenly interested in ethical partnerships. But the message that meant the most came from an email address he didn't recognize. The subject line read, From Doris in Kansas. He opened it. Dear Nuz, I'm 81 years old. I watched the video of what happened today at that fancy hotel in New York. I cried when you stood up for us, for old people like me who the world often forgets about. I've lived through a lot. I saw Kennedy get shot on TV. I watched men walk on the moon. I protested Vietnam. I marched for civil rights. I raised 3 children alone after my husband died. I've seen the world change in ways I could never have imagined when I was young. But you know what hasn't changed? The need for real human connection, for authentic stories, for truth. When I watch your videos, I don't see a young man from another country. I see someone who cares about people, all people, young, old, rich, poor, from anywhere in the world. That man, Sterling, probably never understood that. He saw us as numbers, as demographics, as profit margins, but we're not. We're people with full lives behind us and hopefully some life still ahead of us. We're not done yet. We still have stories to tell and wisdom to share. Thank you for remembering that. Thank you for fighting for us. With love and gratitude, Doris. Nuz read the email 3 times. By the third reading, tears were streaming down his face. The cab driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror but said nothing, respecting a stranger's emotion. This was why it mattered. Not the fame or the views or the brand deals. Not the speaking engagements or the accolades or the industry recognition. This, Doris in Kansas, feeling seen and valued. Frank finally able to tell his Vietnam stories without exploitation. Margaret's recipes preserved with her voice intact. Robert's history protected from corporate whitewashing. Human connection, authentic voices, truth and dignity. The cab dropped Nuz at his apartment building. He paid, tipped generously, and walked inside. His apartment was small but comfortable, filled with mementos from 8 years of travel and storytelling. Before bed, he wrote one more email. To Richard Sterling. Mr. Sterling, I saw your comment on Alina's article. I appreciate your apology, but I want you to understand something important. This isn't about you versus me. It's about how we treat people, especially people who society often dismisses as past their prime. Frank Coleman is 71. Margaret Chen is 68. Robert Washington is 65. Doris watches my videos and she's 81. They're not done contributing to the world. They're not relics to be archived or sanitized. They're living, breathing people with wisdom earned through decades of experience. Your generation controlled media for so long that you forgot media is supposed to serve the audience, not control them. You thought you knew what older viewers wanted better than they knew themselves. That was your fundamental mistake. I hope you spend your retirement actually listening to people instead of assuming you know better. There's still time for you to learn. You're 78, not dead. You could spend the next decade discovering the authentic connections you missed while chasing profit and control. The world is changing. Your choice is whether to change with it or become irrelevant. With sincere hope for your growth, Nusair Yassin, he hit send before he could second-guess the message. Maybe Sterling would read it and dismiss it. Maybe he would read it and reflect. Either way, Nuz had said what needed to be said. The next morning, Nuz woke to discover that the story had exploded globally. News outlets across 6 continents had picked it up. Authentic Voices was trending on social media. Three major platforms had announced new creator protection policies. Two senators had called for hearings on digital media ethics. But the most important development came from an unexpected source. Richard Sterling had released a video statement. It was posted on his personal website, the first and only content on the newly created site. In the video, Sterling sat in what looked like his home office. He wore a simple sweater, not his usual suit. He looked tired, older, humbled. "My name is Richard Sterling. I'm 78 years old. Yesterday, I was forced to resign as CEO of Sterling Media Group because of decisions I made that hurt people. I want to talk about why I made those decisions and what I'm learning." Nas watched, fascinated. "I built my career in an era when media companies controlled everything. We decided what stories got told, how they got told, and who told them. We had power, and I won't lie, I liked having that power. When digital media exploded, I saw it as chaos. Independent creators making content without our oversight, without our standards, without our control. I thought I needed to fix that." Sterling paused, his hands shaking slightly. "But I was wrong. Those independent creators didn't need fixing. They were showing us a better way, authentic voices telling authentic stories. I just couldn't see it because I was so invested in the old way of doing things." He looked directly at the camera. "I owe apologies to 23 creators whose work I tried to exploit. I'm in the process of writing personal letters to each of them. But I especially want to apologize to Nasir Yassin Nas Daily, who had the courage to expose what I was doing. He risked his career to protect people he'd never met. That's the kind of integrity I used to have before power corrupted it." Sterling's eyes were wet now. "I'm 78 years old. I don't have many years left. I could spend them bitter and defensive, insisting I was right all along. Or I can spend them learning, growing, maybe even contributing something positive instead of just extracting profit. I'm choosing the second path." The video ended. Nas sat stunned. People didn't change like this, especially not 78-year-old media tycoons. But maybe, just maybe, yesterday's confrontation had cracked something open in Sterling. Maybe facing his own obsolescence and moral failure had finally made him willing to learn. Over the following weeks, a strange transformation occurred. Richard Sterling became an unlikely advocate for independent creators. He wrote op-eds about the mistakes of his generation's approach to media. He funded grants for older creators. He appeared in interviews discussing how corporate media had failed audiences. Some people accused him of trying to rehabilitate his image. They were probably right, but his actions, regardless of motivation, made a difference. Frank Coleman's Vietnam videos received funding for a full documentary series. Margaret Chen published a cookbook and launched a cooking show that celebrated traditional recipes. Robert Washington partnered with the Smithsonian to archive his historical documentation. The 21 other creators Sterling had targeted all found new opportunities, their authentic voices protected and amplified. As for Nas Daily, the summit incident became a defining moment in his career. But not in the way he expected. He didn't become more famous, he was already famous. Instead, he became known as someone who would fight for others, who valued principle over profit, who understood that authentic human connection mattered more than corporate polish. His audience grew, but more importantly, the demographics shifted. More older viewers found his content. More intergenerational conversations happened in the comments. People in their 20s learned from commenters in their 70s. Grandparents watched videos with grandchildren, bridging gaps that had seemed unbridgeable. 6 months after the summit, Nas received an invitation to speak at the next Digital Media Association conference. The theme was Authentic Voices Across Generations. Jonathan Barnes had asked him personally to give the keynote address. Nas accepted. On the day of the conference, he walked into the same Manhattan Plaza hotel. This time, he was on the guest list. This time, security nodded respectfully as he passed. This time, he wasn't interrupting, he was invited. The ballroom was packed. 300 seats filled with creators, executives, journalists, and viewers. The demographics had changed too, more older faces in the crowd, more diversity in age, background, and perspective. Frank Coleman sat in the front row wearing his veteran's cap. Margaret Chen was beside him, smiling warmly. Robert Washington gave Nas a thumbs up. Elena Martinez sat with her recorder ready, still documenting stories that mattered. And in the back corner, sitting quietly and without fanfare, was Richard Sterling. Their eyes met across the room. Sterling nodded once acknowledgement, respect, perhaps even gratitude. Nas nodded back. When Nas took the stage, he looked out at the assembled faces, young and old from everywhere, united by a belief that authentic stories mattered. "Thank you for inviting me," he began. 6 months ago, I stood on a different stage in this same room and said things I had to say. Today, I want to talk about what happened next. He spoke for 45 minutes about connection and authenticity, about respecting all voices regardless of age, about the importance of protecting independent creators while fostering ethical partnerships with platforms. But the most important part of his speech came at the end. I want to introduce you to some people, Nas said. These are the creators whose voices almost got erased, but they're here now, ready to tell you their own stories. One by one, Frank, Margaret, and Robert came to the stage. Each spoke for 5 minutes about their experiences, their content, and their hopes for authentic storytelling. Their words carried weight, the weight of lives fully lived, of wisdom earned, of dignity maintained. The audience listened with rapt attention. Phones recorded not to call out wrongdoing this time, but to preserve and share wisdom. After the speeches, during the reception, Nas found himself standing near the window, looking out at Central Park. The trees showed their October colors again, exactly 1 year after the confrontation that changed everything. Richard Sterling approached slowly, hesitantly. "Mr. Yassin, do you have a moment?" Mr. Sterling, of course. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Sterling spoke, his voice quiet. "I've spent this year trying to understand where I went wrong. I've watched hundreds of hours of independent creator content. I've read thousands of viewer comments. I've talked with people like Frank and Margaret and Robert, and you know what I learned? What's that? I learned that I spent 50 years in media and never actually listened to the audience. I told them what they should want. I never asked what they actually wanted. And what they want is simple, authentic human connection. That's it. That's what matters." Sterling looked down at his hands that had signed so many contracts, controlled so many narratives, wielded so much power. "I'm 79 now. I have maybe 10 good years left if I'm lucky. I don't want to waste them, so I'm starting something new, a foundation that funds independent creators over 60 who want to share their stories. No exploitation, no hidden contracts, just support for authentic voices." Nuz smiled. "That's good, Mr. Sterling, really good. It doesn't make up for what I tried to do, but maybe it's a start toward leaving something positive behind instead of just a legacy of control and extraction." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Nuz said, "especially when they're willing to actually change." Sterling extended his hand. Nuz shook it firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Yassin, for stopping me, for teaching me, for showing me a better way while there's still time to learn." After Sterling walked away, Alina joined Nuz at the window. "You believe him?" she asked. "That he's really changed?" "I think he's trying. Whether he succeeds or not, time will tell, but I choose to believe people can grow at any age. If we stop believing that, we give up on humanity." "Fair enough. So what's next for Nas Daily?" Nuz looked out at the park, at the changing leaves, at the city full of stories waiting to be told. "More of the same, I think. More stories, more connections, more reminders that humanity is beautiful. That's what I started doing 8 years ago, and it's what I'll keep doing." "No plans to start a media empire? No Sterling Media too?" Nuz laughed. "No, I learned something important from all this. The moment you start prioritizing control and profit over authentic connection, you've already lost what matters. I'm just going to keep being me, telling stories that matter, respecting the people who watch them. Your audience loves that about you, you know, the older viewers especially. You treat them like real people instead of a demographic. Because they are real people. They've lived through history. They've earned wisdom. They deserve respect. It's not complicated." Later that evening, after the conference ended, Nuz found himself back in his apartment, scrolling through comments on his latest video. Mixed in with the usual feedback were messages that made everything worthwhile. From Doris1944, "Dear Nuz, I'm 82 now, still watching every video. Still finding joy. Thank you for fighting for old folks like me. We're not done yet." From Frank Coleman71, "Brother, you changed my life. Thanks to you, my stories are reaching people I never imagined. My grandchildren are proud of their grandpa. That means everything." From Margaret Chen68, "My mother's recipes are going to live forever now, told in my voice with my memories. That's what you protected, not just content, but legacy. Bless you." Nuz felt tears in his eyes again. He seemed to cry more easily these days. Maybe that was growth too, becoming more comfortable with emotion, with vulnerability, with the full range of human feeling. He pulled out his phone and started recording a new video. Just him, his camera, and a message he needed to share. "Hi, I'm Nas Daily, and today I want to talk about something important. 1 year ago, I had to stand up and fight for independent creators whose voices were almost erased. Today, I want to talk about why that mattered." He spoke for 2 minutes about authenticity, about respecting all generations, about the power of real human connection. Then he said something he rarely said in videos. "I want to thank you, everyone who watches, everyone who comments, everyone who shares these stories. You're not just an audience. You're not a demographic. You're people who make this work meaningful. People of all ages from everywhere united by believing that authentic stories matter. He paused, his voice catching with emotion. To the older viewers especially, thank you for giving my videos a chance. Thank you for sharing your wisdom in the comments. Thank you for reminding me that real human connection transcends age, nationality, or any other division. You make these videos better by being part of the conversation. He ended the video with his signature line, "That's 1 minute, see you tomorrow." But this time, it felt different. Not just content creation, but genuine communication. Not just views and metrics, but human connection. That night, Nas slept soundly for the first time in months. He dreamed of the people he'd met, the stories he'd heard, the connections he'd made. In his dreams, Frank and Margaret and Robert sat at a table telling stories to an audience of thousands, their voices carrying weight and wisdom, their faces showing lives fully lived. And somewhere in the dream, Richard Sterling sat listening, finally understanding what he had almost destroyed, finally appreciating what authentic voices really meant. When Nas woke the next morning, his phone showed 20,000 new comments on the video. He scrolled through them slowly, savoring each one, people sharing their own stories, grandchildren thanking him on behalf of grandparents, older viewers expressing gratitude for being seen and valued, young creators promising to respect and protect authentic voices. One comment from a user named Caroline B69 caught his eye. "Thank you for reminding the world that older people still have value, still have stories, still have wisdom to share. My husband is 73 now, and he's rediscovered his purpose working with independent creators. You didn't just change his career, you gave him back his soul. With deepest gratitude, Caroline Barnes." Nas smiled, saved the comment, and started his day. He had a meeting with Frank about a collaborative video project, then lunch with Margaret to discuss her new cookbook, then an interview about the foundation Richard Sterling had established, then dinner with Alina to talk about her next investigation, this time into platforms that were doing things right, supporting creators ethically. It was a full day, a meaningful day, a day filled with purpose and connection and hope. As he walked through Manhattan toward his first meeting, Nas thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a Harvard graduate working at Venmo to a content creator to an advocate for authentic voices. From someone making 1-minute videos to someone who had stood on a stage and changed an industry. But he also thought about how little had really changed. He was still the same person, still making videos, still telling stories, still believing in the power of authentic human connection. The only difference was that now he understood how fragile that authenticity could be, how easily it could be exploited or erased, how important it was to protect not just his own voice, but all voices, especially those the world tried to silence. He passed a newsstand and saw a magazine with his face on the cover. The headline read, "How Nas Daily Changed Digital Media." He smiled but didn't buy a copy. The story wasn't about him. It was never about him. It was about Frank and Margaret and Robert and Doris and millions of others who deserved to be heard, valued, and respected. It was about authentic voices across generations, connecting in ways that profit-driven corporations could never manufacture or control. It was about human beings recognizing each other's humanity, regardless of age or background or circumstance. It was about choosing truth over polish, connection over control, people over profit. And that story, that beautiful, ongoing, never-ending story, was far bigger than Nas Daily could ever be. But he was honored to be a small part of it. He reached Frank's apartment building and pressed the buzzer. Frank's voice came through the intercom, warm and welcoming. "Nas, come on up, brother. I've got coffee brewing and stories to tell." Nas smiled, pushed through the door, and climbed the stairs toward another day of authentic connection, meaningful work, and genuine human storytelling. Because that's what mattered. Not fame or fortune or industry recognition, but this. Real people telling real stories to real audiences who genuinely cared. Everything else was just noise. And Nas Daily, for all his millions of followers and global reach, had never forgotten that fundamental truth. He hoped he never would.